Now, we welcome everyone to the Museum of Glass. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you are wondering what we are going to be making here today, we do have a chalk drawing here in the center of what we're making. Now, to begin this piece, we're going to begin by creating the pinwheels that will go on the surface. So the process we will see here is the actual creation of these pieces. We can see some examples of the pinwheels on this end of the hot shop around this area. Hello. Now, this is always a satisfying part to watch about glass making. Down in the center, we have these striped lines. It's how we're going to create the line work we see on our pinwheels. Now, these lines originally begin as rods down here, as we can see, coming in all different forms of color. After a few steps, we will explain how color is added to clear glass. Now, Sunday is always a very packed day for us here at the Museum of Glass. For our first half of the demonstration, we're going to be working on this piece. After that, we will take our lunch break, and our visiting artist that we have will be giving a lecture about the artwork she explored during this residency and a little bit more about the previous artwork. After that, we will then begin to work on this piece we see here. It's made with small pieces of tile glass that was cut into a triangle and then made into an effect. So this is the piece that we will work on later today. Just a heads up. Hope you can join us for that second half of the day. Now, my name is David. If you have questions about today's demonstration, please feel free to grab my attention, raise your hand, or shout my name. Do what you have to do. But the action will be starting on the left-hand side. If I lose you during today's demonstration, just let me know. Now, the hot molten glass we are working with is being pulled out of the furnace on your left-hand side of the studio. Now, this furnace is quite brand new. It's only been on for a few weeks or a little bit over a few months. Now, behind this door lies a crucible or a ceramic pot. It's how we melt the molten glass. Now, this furnace will stay on all year round. We won't turn it off, not even over the holidays or for a weekend. Hopefully, we won't have to turn it off for 10 years or so, as long as we can keep it turned on. We also use a different furnace to reheat the glass. We call this a glory hole. The main difference between the glory hole and the furnace is that the glory hole contains no glass. It is just the fire we enter to continue to manipulate the molten glass. And unlike the furnace, this chamber will be turned off at 5 o'clock when we close tonight. Well, down on the left-hand side, we've added a little bit of glass on the tip to close the bubble. Now that we've had a closed atmosphere, we can just get rid of the clear glass we added towards the tip. Now, any colored glass that ends up on the ground, we don't recycle it. If we try to recycle colored glass, it can just melt into the furnace and spread throughout the 1,000 pounds of glass. Even if it's clear and it ends up on the ground, we still won't recycle it due to any dirt or debris that it may have picked up. Well, on the center, we are going to begin on the body of the sculpture. And on the left-hand side, we will be creating the pinwheels. Eventually, both pieces will be joined together. Now, the beginning process begins with the coloring application. On the end of our visiting artist rod, she has white color. Her job now is to make that solid bar of white more malleable, ensure that it's hot. Regardless of the color, when we work with the glass, it's always going to turn red and orange. And it's due to the heat distorting the true color of the glass. The color we purchase from a manufacturer, now typically colors are made outside the United States. Either way, they add different metal oxides from the periodic table of elements. Different metals will produce a different color. To create a blue, we might add a cobalt. To create a green, we might add manganese or chromium. To create white, we will add antimonium. Now, red and pink glass happen to be some of the more expensive color in the glass industry. And the reason is because they add gold to make red and pink. And you can see that in the price point of red and pink glass. To apply the solid color, we will create a bubble that we can place that color on top. Later on, we will spread that color evenly around a clear bubble. All we are doing is creating a thin layer of color. When we add clear glass to the surface, it will magnify that underlaying color and make this whole piece look solid. Even when we see these pieces down here, it's just a thin layer of color, but it's due to the property of glass. Well, in the center, we are going to introduce Gabe. Now, Gabe has gathered glass on the end of a blowpipe, and he's blown a starting bubble. I also want to dive in deep with our visiting artists we have here in the center of the studio, Claire Kelly. Again, she will be giving a lecture later on today, but she holds an MFA from Alfred University, located on the East Coast. Now, earlier this year, she was selected to demo at this year's Glass Art Conference in Venice, Italy. She's also been a resident artist at Pittsburgh Glass Center, the studio at Corning Museum of Glass, and Salem State University, just to name a few. Now that the color has been applied to the very top of the bubble, it is now Gabe's job to push that evenly. It's very important that he takes his time with this process. If we rush or speed through this, there's a possibility of having a lot more color on one side than another. We will see that in the finished result. Do we have any questions so far? I hope I haven't lost anyone yet. What is the temperature inside of the furnace? The furnace where the glass is being kept is about 2100 degrees Fahrenheit, or about the same temperature as molten lava. The temperature of the glory hole is slightly hotter than that at 2300 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, all around the hot shop, we have these steel tables. When we're rolling back and forth, we call this marvering. We're marvering the glass. This can shape, push the color, but it also draws the heat out of the glass. So these tables can be your best friend, but they can also be your worst enemy, depending on what you're trying to do or establish the bubble. So our visiting artist began to work with glass at Alfred University. That's where she was first exposed to glass making. As the coloring application continues in the center, on the left-hand side, we have Courtney Branham creating the pinwheels that will be added on the surface. Now, to ensure we have a clean cut, another glassmaker, part of the Museum of Glass hot shop crew, Sarah, is using a hot torch. Now, that torch may be small, but it packs a punch. It's the hottest piece of equipment in this studio at 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So, safety, the safety gear that we wear here at the Museum of Glass. Now, we don't wear gloves because they can restrict our movements a lot. They can constrict our hands. We also like to wear natural fibers here in the studio, like cotton, not polyester, because that can melt to your skin. We also wear some type of safety eyewear, if it may be sunglasses or safety or even prescription glasses, just something to protect our beautiful eyes. Oh, and one last one is we don't wear sandals or open-toed shoes. That's a big no-no here in the studio also. How did the people, okay, so the team that we see here, how did they begin to work with glass? Well, there's a variety of different ways you can learn to work with glass. You can go to college, as some of our crew members have. You can also go to work in a local studio. And it just takes a lot of practice, a lot of repetition to get the necessary hand skills necessary. Now, the crew that we have here at the museum, it's unlike any other crew around the world. Now, I say this because our crew has been working with different artists every week. Now, the way that this museum works is that we will invite a visiting artist from across the world. There's a variety of different ways an artist can end up here at the museum. They can apply, we can ask them, and we even grant residencies to recipients of different awards from our community. So there's a variety of ways an artist can end up here. Either way, we've been doing this for 16 years. Some of our crew members have been here since the beginning. Now, if you do that for 16 years, working on unique projects every single week, you develop some unique skills that other glassmakers around the world may have not. And that's what I think makes the Museum of Glass crew so unique. It's just that they see this experience that other glassmakers don't usually get. For our piece, we're doing a double overlay. This means we're just gonna be adding two colors with white on the inside and a separate color on the outside. There's a variety of different reasons why we do two colors. White is often used on the underlay of colors to create a clean palette, but also white is a stiff color. It stabilizes a lot of different shapes, ensuring that it's not gonna be too soft when being worked on. Now, all the pinwheels that are being produced on this left-hand side are entering the garage. The garage is a temporary place where we can store glass and maintain its temperature. On the coldest end, it's about 900 degrees. It's where our pieces are going at right now. But this end is about 1,000 degrees. When we're getting ready to place the pinwheels on our glass, we will go ahead and slide them to this area. Now that top balcony is a fantastic place to view the live glass making. When an artist comes to the Museum of Glass, they will keep all the artwork that is produced during up to those 5 days. All we ask is for them to donate 2 pieces to the museum, and with one of them eventually being showed in our top balcony. So we've color tested the color that we've added on the surface, and it's this blue that we see here. That blue will also look very similar to the piece we create here with the similar pinwheels also that are being produced on the left-hand side of the studio. It sure is. We have an amazing visiting artist here today, Claire Kelly, working on your right hand side with a black t shirt. She is our visiting artist here today. She's coming from Rhode Island. And today is her last day here at the Museum of Glass, completing her 5-day residency with the Museum of Glass Hot Shop crew. Well, the tool we use to shape the glass now is called the Jax. And this is the Swiss Army knife of glass making. There's a variety of different ways we can use this tool. But the blades, we will slide on some beeswax, which will prevent any scratching that may occur on that top layer. And oftentimes, if you see them smoke or catch on fire, it is just the beeswax. Well, in glass making, there's a lot of waiting. Waiting for the glass to heat up, but also waiting for it to cool down. By letting it cool down, we're giving ourselves the ability to gather more glass so our piece in turn can be bigger. By letting the core cool down, we're also stabilizing it, making our job easier of turning the rod and maintaining control. For our audience that just joined us, I do want to introduce the furnace. It is where we are pulling the molten glass and making our piece larger. Now, our furnace is holding approximately 1,000 pounds of molten glass inside a crucible or a ceramic pot. As we see our glass maker, Gabe Feenan, step in front of the furnace, he's adding an additional layer. This process of gathering glass is repeated until we have sufficient amount of glass to begin to shape our piece. Exactly, right? Now, typically after a gather, we will use a wooden block. This wooden block will ensure that our bubble will blow out evenly. And whenever you see woods being used here in the studio, you can always assume they're made out of some type of fruit wood, like cherry wood, contains more moisture, and it will just last longer. At the museum, we have an incredible collection right now going on by Preston Singletary. I highly recommend it. Um, and it's probably my favorite show also out there. And just like last time, we're going to repeat the process of gathering. We're going to be repeating this a few times before we move on to the next step. Now, as this is going on, I do want to introduce the glory hole. It's what we're using to reheat the glass, slightly hotter than the furnace at 2,300 degrees Fahrenheit. If we take a frozen pizza, we could probably thaw it, burn it, and cook it within a minute. It's extremely, extremely hot. Although we are working with a blue color, I can show an example of that color, but for the majority of today's demonstration, it will just look red and orange due to the heat distorting its true color. Now, my name is David. If you have questions, I love questions. It's my favorite part about my job. So at any time, please feel free to grab my attention, raise your hand, or shout my name. Well, we use a pipe cooler, which is just cold water that's being placed on top of the rod, which in turn just cools down the rod, makes our job easier of turning the rod. But the rods themselves, they're made from a company in Seattle that makes equipment specifically for glass makers. This rod is made out of stainless steel, a very poor conductor of heat. If you take a close inspection, you'll notice that the rod goes from its shininess all the way to a dull gray and black. We are typically not placing our hand in any discoloration you see, but rather directly behind that. Now, the wooden blocks live in water their whole life, only ever brought out to be used or cleaned. So they're essentially waterlogged all the way down to the center. As the massive glass gets bigger, we have a bigger block to accommodate its sides. And we have some pretty large ones even in the back of the museum we can use. Well, another shaping tool we use is none other than the Wall Street Journal, just folded up and drenched in water. That newspaper will only last a week or two if we're lucky. Other than that, we'll just recycle it and fold a new pair. As long as we keep the top layer moist, it won't catch on fire or leave any residue behind. Well, earlier I introduced our visiting artist, Claire Kelly, working in the center, but she's also our gaffer. The gaffer is the term in glassmaking used for the person in charge. So the center is known as the gaffer's bench, person in charge, and then the person actually making the piece is the gaffer. If we speed through the process of this and just gather when it's hot, that massive glass can become really difficult to maintain control, and it can eventually just plop on the ground, and that's definitely not what we want. We want to keep all the glass on the rod. About how much does it weigh at this moment? I would say around maybe 13 or 14 pounds of glass on the end. We'll double check here with the glass makers as we add more. Now, that might not seem like a lot. You might say, well, you know, that's dumbbells weight there. But it's all on the end of the rod exactly, which can feel like you're going fishing with a bowling ball on the end of the rod is what it feels like. Yes. So our fuel source here at the Museum of Glass is natural gas. The natural gas is also regulated by computers all behind the museum. Well, it's better that we're not wasting gas, better. And I don't know the actual number that we burned through here at the museum. I gotta be honest, I'm too scared to ask, so I probably won't even ask that question. It's gonna break my heart, and I know it will. Now, most studios aren't very large. How we have one here, we are an open studio. Our furnace, we have 2,000-pound furnace. Now, we're all familiar with Dale Chihuly. We have a collection of his out here in our gallery. And Dale's studio, just to put in reference, has 1,000-pound furnace. The glory hole that we also have on the left-hand side here that's currently turned off, that also happens to be one of the largest ones in the world. Would you like your backpack? Well, we noticed on this end, Sarah's standing by to blow air. If you're wondering how much air she's blowing, it's about the same air pressure you use to blow out a candle. It's not a lot of air, but we're listening for key words from our gaffer. Something as little as blow softly or blow hard. A great way, a great place to hear the communication is the top balcony also. All right. Well, for this next move, before we go any farther in the demonstration, we need to ensure that there's a place where we can break the usable glass from the rod. We call this constriction a jack line, the jack line being the weak spot in the massive glass. Okay, so in correction, before we make that constriction, that jack line, we're gonna add all the pinwheels first. The pinwheels were being made on the left-hand side with Courtney Branham. We can see him on this end still working on these pinwheels, still working hard. Now, all the pinwheels were placed on the farthest door, which is on this side. Now, this is approximately 900 degrees Fahrenheit, but we want to ensure that these pinwheels are as hot as we can get them. So we'll begin to slide them over to the 1,000-degree area, and then we will also do a detail of just elevating the pinwheels. Hot air rises, so we know that this area here is going to be hotter than 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. To ensure that these pinwheels will stick to the glass, we are using the hottest piece of equipment on the studio, and it's that small torch. And it packs a punch. It's a mixture between oxygen and propane, and it's about 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It's so hot that it can boil away the clear glass and also any color that we may have. So we are careful when we're using it to not to overexpose the actual glass. Pretty awesome, right? We are just gonna continue that process. Courtney's gonna continue to bring the pinwheels right on over. And what we're using to attach them is just a little bit of clear glass. Very similar to the pieces of glass we see here. But the connection is so weak, just by giving it a quick tug, it can break it free. We welcome everyone to the Museum of Glass. Thank you for joining us here today. We are going to be working on a piece very similar to this one that we have right here. I actually have a little bit of the color. This is what the piece of glass will look like when it's complete. But right now, it's going to look red and orange due to the heat distorting the true color of the glass. But it's going to be this lovely blue. Oh, yes. How do we put color in glass? Now, the color we actually purchase separately, and it comes to us in a bar form. I'm going to hand this to you. You can pass it around the audience. Now, the way that color is made is that the manufacturer will add different metal oxides. Different metals from the periodic table will create different colors. If you don't mind me asking, what's your favorite color? Yellow. I actually don't know what they make yellow. Do you have a different favorite color? Green. Oh, I know green. Green is we use chromium or iron. Specifically metals, do you have a different favorite color maybe? Red. Ooh, red is very unique. Now, red and pink are made from gold, which make red and pink some of the more expensive color in the glass industry, and it's because you're paying for that gold content. A bar of orange won't cost as much, like $30, but red or pink glass, that same amount of bar, you can triple the price. My favorite color, I like blue glass. To create blue, we can add cobalt. But there's so many different mixtures of glass. Here at the museum, we have a small color room where our artists can decide what color they're using, but we could also theoretically make color here at the museum. The furnace on the left-hand side, let's add that gold. Let's make red glass. We can add some of those oxides inside of there, but that means everything inside that furnace will be red, which may be cool for a while, but after a while we realize, hey, everything we're making is red or the same color. So here at the museum, we melt clear glass, which will give us the ability to use the full range of the color spectrum. And if you also notice the color, the label is in German, typically colors made outside the United States. Do you have a question? So the animals you see here on this table, they were made earlier during our visiting artist residency here at the museum. Today completes our last day at the Museum of Glass. But luckily, after this piece is complete, we will be giving a lecture. Our visiting artist will be giving a lecture about the artwork she explored here at the Museum of Glass. As every pinwheel gets added, we place our finger over the blowpipe hole. Now this is to ensure when we're squishing that we're not gonna deflate the bubble that we have, that we're not gonna collapse it. So one thing I've noticed when going into studios and hot shops, they always have a really good speaker system for some reason. Typically the music is kind of picked out by our artists that we have here or even the crew. But regardless, when you go to a studio, they're always going to be playing music, but it's kind of a common thing. Unfortunately, Walt is taking the day off today. So we have another MC here at the Museum of Glass. His name is Walt Liberman. He's a glass historian, very knowledgeable about the glass history. Um, he's typically here on the weekends. I do recommend it's a really good time to get a really good kind of history lesson about glass. I've never been able to ask a question to Walt that hasn't stumped him. He's very knowledgeable. Yeah, no problem. Thank you so much. Do we have any questions from our audience? Any questions that you may have about today's demonstration? If you don't, it's totally fine. Please sit back, relax, enjoy the Museum of Glass. You can always check out the live glass making from the top balcony, which I highly recommend. The pinwheels, how they were made. Well, it's made in this very similar fashion as the cups that we have here. Now, if you can see, it's kind of a pinwheel on the top. So what we would do is we open up a tube, exactly like this, and we would just flare it out and create a constriction. That's exactly how this is made. Now, the stripes you see here are just the stripes from down here, from this table. Now, the manufacturer also produces these. It's the same thing as a color bar, just thinner. But these are great glass pencils. You can draw right on the glass however you want to, melting them on contact. And of course, they come in all variety of colors. When you're purchasing color, it's like going to a candy store. They sell every single color you can ever imagine. It's amazing. I mean, the color goes from the ground to the ceiling, stacks of different hues of color. So these little lines that we see here, well, these were made in a separate style. We call this Marini. Marini is a very fancy Italian way of decorating the surface of the glass. We're actually going to be putting a similar piece with this tile texture here. They're made out of little triangles with little lines. It's a very similar process that we see here. Although these are triangle, these would be square, and we can just rearrange them. This piece will be heated up after we come back from lunch. So this is going to be the next piece we work on. We always get asked how many pieces we make a day. It depends on how complicated something is. This is a quite complicated piece because it's a sheet right now. They're all single. We need to heat them up, ensure they can all stick to one another, and then create this into a bubble. And we'll see how we do that later on. So today, we will probably only make 2 pieces. We can now go back to the marvering process. Again, marvering just means you're rolling back and forth on the steel table. Now, traditionally, these tables were made out of a marble. That's where we get that term marvering from. Nowadays, though, not many studios have used marble anymore. Steel's kind of taken over now. There's a few different reasons, of course. The price point. And it's also that marble breaks under enormous temperature. So if we gather fresh hot glass, we can't use that table because it will crack it. So it's now time to create the jack line, the weak spot that we will exploit later on, and how we separate the bubble from the rod itself. Now, to do this move, we need to get the glass really, really hot on that back edge. And for this reason, we use different torches, like a propane torch at approximately 2,500 degrees area to preheat the back area. The way that the glory hole works is that the tip of the bubble will always get hotter before the rest does. To counteract this, we use the torch, especially since that area is what we wish to manipulate next. Well, as this process continues, Courtney Branham on this edge has wooden paddles. All he is doing is shielding our gaffer from the heat that's radiating off the bubble. If we put a marshmallow on a stick and place it on top of the bubble, we can begin to caramelize it. So there's so many things that happen in one single moment. As we see, we turn the rod, use the newspapers to control the bubble, we're blowing air, and we're also protecting our gaffer, all in one movement. So the next step is to begin to create our bubble to look more like our shape that we have here. So we're gonna split this bubble essentially in half to create the crease we see on our examples around the studio. We're using a pair of cork paddles, which is a very dense layer of cork we can use to squish the bubble. Anytime we're touching the actual bubble, we like to use natural fibers, which won't leave any residue or markings left behind. Now, our visiting artist is coming to us from Rhode Island. Today is our last day of our 5-day residency at the Museum of Glass. In conclusion with this residency, during our lunch break, our visiting artist, Claire Kelly, will be giving a lecture here at the museum about the artwork she experimented and worked on here during this residency. Now, another question we had is about the color that we're working with. It is a lovely blue. When I get back to the hot shop floor, I'll make sure to point that blue out for all of us to see and view. But for the rest of the demonstration, it will look like this hue at this green state. But again, that is not the true color. Typically, when you see red and orange, that's the way that we can see and gauge the heat. We begin to preheat one side. Now, this is the side that we will begin to create a crease, as we see in our chalk drawing. Now, for our audience that's just joining us, we welcome you to the Museum of Glass, as today will be the final day of Claire Kelly's residency here at the museum. If you have questions, my name is David, and I'm more than happy to answer any question that you may have about today's demonstration. I'll be roaming around the top balcony and also the hot shop floor. Please feel free to grab my attention. Now, we had a question about the residencies that we offer here at the Museum of Glass and how they work. Now, anyone can apply for a residency online. To us, it doesn't really matter the background. You can be engineer, architect, designer. One of my teachers from my college has actually been one of our visiting artists, and she's a ceramicist. So you just have to apply online. Well, we're getting ready to transfer our piece onto a different rod. We call this the punty. So Gabe with the blue shirt, he's brought over the punty. It's gonna be the new handle on which we can begin to work on the opposite half, on the top half. Now, only half of this piece is essentially complete. We will begin to work on the top area. Since we have two rods, we need to break the previous one free. To do this, we're just gonna add a few drops of water on the jack line we created. Again, the jack line being a weak spot in the massive glass. Well, if we break it off too early, it can be difficult to turn, so we stabilize both ends, and then with a few drops, all we need is 2 drops, one on each end, and then a slight tap breaks the piece free, and we can now begin to concentrate that top half. But we are also noticing the color coming back to its true state, especially towards that back area. We're going to begin to see more of its true blue hue. Now, we had a question about the crew that we see here now. Besides our visiting artist, Claire Kelly, working in the center with the black. Now, she is called our gaffer, again, the gaffer being the term for the person in charge. The rest of the crew that you see on the studio is part of the Museum of Glass Hot Shop crew. This includes Gabe Feenan, who's blue shirt turning the rod right now. We also see Sarah Gilbert standing by to torch this piece, and we also on the opposite end see Courtney Branham. Now he's standing by to blow air through that blowpipe we have. When an artist wins a residency here at the Museum of Glass, they also get this amazing, talented crew. Fantastic question. So the line work that we see in some of the animals and some of the balls we see here, now the lines are made from cane. Even the lines we see here on this piece, they're all made from these strands of glass. Every single line that you see in each piece is one individual cane. But as you can see, even on our giraffes, those lines are quite small. So these have been stretched and pulled to create that small of a line. But the starting point for those is the cane. Now, I know we had a lot of audience join us here shortly, so I quickly just want to pause and introduce some of the equipment that we're working with here so we all have a basic understanding of what we're creating. We are working on this piece we see here with the pinwheel stripes. The true color of the glass is right here. Although it looks green right now, it looks like this green right here, but it's not that color. It's gonna be this one that we see here with the similar color palette of the pinwheels going around. Now, the molten glass that we're working with is being pulled out of the furnace on your left-hand side of the hot shop floor. We're melting approximately 1,000 pounds of molten glass at 2,100 degrees in our furnace. Now we're using a glory hole to reheat the glass. There's no glass inside of that furnace. It is just heat and fire that's inside. It's how we're gonna continue to manipulate the massive glass. So if we keep our sculpture out here for, I would say, 2 or 3 minutes, it's going to break and crack. It's just gonna get too cold too quickly. So we keep entering the glory hole to maintain its temperature above 900 degrees Fahrenheit. Anything below 700, just like that, the glass will simply break. Now at this time, we would like to stop and thank our members we have in our audience. Thank you so much for your continuous support. Because of your support, we can fund a lot of different projects here at the museum, like our Kids Design Glass program, where children 12 and under can submit a drawing to a contest that we hold monthly. We choose one winner a month, and their drawing is completely made out of glass. Two are made, one for the child to take home, and one for our collection. We have a traveling collection at SeaTac Airport, and your membership helps fund that program. But also our Hot Shop Heroes, where veterans suffering from PTSD can use glass as a therapy to combat it. And our veterans are coming to us from Joint Base Lewis McChord, which is 30 minutes out from here. And again, all those programs, they're funded by our audience and our members that we have here. So thank you so much from me and everyone here on this Hot Shop floor. We'd like to thank you for being a member. Well, the next step to take is to place our finished sculpture into the annealer. The annealer will be the oven that will bring our glass back to room temperature. If it's left out here in the open, even on the concrete floor, it's gonna get too cold too fast. The outside of the glass will cool down faster than the inside. That temperature difference will stress the glass out, and eventually that's the stress that causes it to break within minutes. To eliminate all the stress in our massive glass, it will be placed into the oven on your left-hand side with the green number 1. It's currently sitting at 920 degrees, and our piece will stay in there for the next 10.5 hours. So around noonish tomorrow, we will be able to open our annealer and view our finished piece. One of our glassmakers, Courtney Branham, has suited up in a heat protective layer with Kevlar gloves, very similar to what firefighters use in high temperature situations. So with a little bit of water on another jack line, again the jack line being the weak spot, we can now exploit with a few drops of water. Well, what a success here at the Museum of Glass. Again, everyone, Claire Kelly, can we give her another round of applause? Today concludes her residency here at the Museum of Glass. Now, Claire's going to be giving a lecture here soon, here in the hot shop. As we transition, we are going to be taking our lunch break here soon. And our visiting artist will take over the studio here. We'll learn about the artwork that she created during these past few days and a little bit more about the artwork that she will be continuing to make. If you want to see the finished piece in its final state, you can follow the Museum of Glass on Instagram or our social media. But if you want to see it immediately, best chances to follow our visiting artist on Instagram at Claire Kelly Glass and on our website, clairekellyglass.com. So today's demonstration will continue for a few minutes before we break off to this lunch. All right, so we're going to continue today's fun. Now, it begins with the coloring application. Now, Courtney Branham down on this side is going to go ahead and begin by getting color. Now, the color is being preheated inside the garage. The garage, a temporary place where we can store glass and keep it warm. By the way, for our audience that are with us now, we are going to be making this piece when we return from lunch. So this piece is made from multiple triangles that we see that were cut, laid out in a pattern. If you want to see this pattern up close, it is really intricate. Definitely get a chance to view it. But this pattern is what we will work on when we come back after lunch. So for our audience that's still with us, we're going to go ahead and make a cup before we break off. So I'm quickly going to introduce you to some of the equipment. we are working with, just so we all know a little bit about the glass blowing process. Now, the glass that we are working with is being produced in our furnace. It is hot. It's about 2,100 degrees Fahrenheit. I mean, it's extremely hot. Now, when we open the door, it looks red and orange, but there is so much more going on. We are heating up a crucible ceramic pot up towards that 2,100 degrees Fahrenheit. And we then have a glory hole that's about 2,300, so slightly hotter than the actual furnace. We're going to be using these two pieces of equipment to create our cup. All right, well, I do want to explain this process. My name is David. If I lose you, please raise your hand, shout my name, and I am more than happy to answer any questions. Now, our visiting artist, Claire Kelly, begins by marvering, which is the process of rolling back and forth on the steel table. She prepares an air bubble by blowing air through the blowpipe, expanding the bubble. How do we prevent the rod from getting hot? Well, the rod itself is made out of stainless steel, a very poor conductor of heat. If you take a close inspection of the rod, towards the tip where it meets the glass, it's dull gray and black, it's hot there. We're not placing our hand there. It's directly behind that discoloration. You can also use just some cold water on the surface of the rod, which in turn cools it down. Yeah, well, you know, when we're making on something huge and large, that heat can travel. We try to use the pipe cooler as much as possible. I always say that that dark zone is the danger zone, but sometimes it does go past that. So everything we see here will be going back to our artist studio. When an artist arrives here at the museum, they will keep everything that we produce. All we ask them is to donate 2 pieces. Most of the time, now, this is a traditional way of making glass cups. The next step is to create a punty with a pontal. The punty is the new rod that we can begin to work on the opposite end. So it's going to be attached on the very bottom. You can see Courtney Branham has gathered glass out of the furnace, and he's shaping that punty. There's a small window to work from when we bring over one of these transfer rods. too hot and it will fuse with the bottom of the piece, make it nearly impossible for it to break off cleanly. And on the other hand, if it's brought over too cold, when we're pulling and tugging on the glass, the piece can end up on the ground. So there's a small window to work from, but luckily our crew is experienced. We are just going to make a cup here just before we break off too much. Yes, some of the process. So our fuel source here is natural gas. Now the natural gas is regulated through essentially computers very back at the museum. Well, we're adding a little bit of color on the end of our cup on the very lip area. This is a decorative touch that we can add. Is it hard for the glass workers to look inside? It is bright, but I gotta let you know there is a little thing that we do now. There's a screen mesh on the shield we have in front of us. We can look through that screen mesh and it gets rid of a lot of the heat that we can face. Now, sometimes you do have to look inside of it, but our body does become acclimated just to the heat that we're working with. Entered an optic mold to give it that extra piece, and it looks very similar to the one we see here. Now the only difference is that the top we've added a clear trail or a trail of colored glass. Well, that cup is going to be put away to slowly cool down. It's just going to be set into the garage. When we're done today, we'll close it up and everything can slowly begin its descent back to room temperature. All right, so before we head off to lunch, I know we had a lot of audience come in here, so we're going to be making one more cup before we break off, all right? Just so we can all understand how glass works. This is traditional way of working with glass. But before we begin the demonstration, one last time, I do want to let everyone know that our visiting artist after this cup will be giving a lecture. This lecture will cover about what she experienced here at the museum and what we created here, a lot of this artwork and where this artwork will be at. So I hope you can stick with us for that lecture. It won't be too long. If you don't want to be here, you can always join us online. Everything you see on that top screen is live streamed, both through our website and also our YouTube channel. Well, all the glass that we're working with is being pulled out of the furnace on your left-hand side. That furnace is holding 1,000 pounds of molten glass at 2,100 degrees Fahrenheit. It's about the same temperature as molten lava. Now, all around the hot shop, we have these steel tables called a marver. The process of rolling back and forth is called marvering. This is what we use to shape the massive glass, but also draw the heat out of the core. To blow an air bubble, we pressurize the rod and place our finger over the hole. Since there is no place for the air to expand, it's going to pierce the bubble in the massive glass. On the opposite end, we're seeing Courtney Branham blowing air through that blowpipe, and he is expanding the bubble that we have as our gaffer, Claire Kelly, is pulling and tugging that massive glass, making our cup taller. Now, any glass that ends up on the ground, even if it's clear, cannot be recycled. If we try to place this back to our furnace, it can be contaminated with any dirt or debris that may be on the floor. So for a long period in history, this is how cups were made. Nowadays, they're made in mass in a production studio or in a factory where no human hands even touch the glass. Well, on the left-hand side, we have Courtney. He's gathered glass out of the furnace, and he's going to shape that mass of glass into the punty. Now, the punty will be the new handle on which we can begin to work on the opposite end. So you have a question about the Chihuly Bridge. There is angels there. Now those were all hand sculpted. There was no very similar fashion as we see here. Now those were actually sculpted by an Italian master also. Of course, I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you may have. As you can tell, our cup is beautiful. Now, just like the previous pieces, if we leave it out here, it's gonna get too cold too fast, and it'll just break or crack. And to prevent it from breaking, we need to slowly cool it down in a controlled environment. We can use our annealer on the left-hand side with the green number 1, but we can also just use our garage. If we close the doors at 5 o'clock, it can slowly make its descent back to room temperature. But for our piece, we are giving an additional detail. We have entered a mold. Can we give a round of applause to our visiting artist, Claire Kelly? You know, as a glassmaker, you learn that things always happen, you know? And it's not... So this cup's reiterating what Claire was saying. We're going for thinness here. These cups, even if you held them, they weigh nothing practically because the bubble is so thin. But every time you make something thinner, you have a higher chance of breaking it because it's thin. Mass holds heat, so when you have something thin, it's just going to lose its heat immediately. Well, this is going to conclude our morning live glass blowing demonstration. Again, we want to thank everyone for joining us. Our visiting artist will be giving a lecture here in the next few moments. But again, thank you everyone for sticking with us here today.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to the Museum of Glass Hot Shop. My name is Katie Buckingham. I'm our curator at MOG today, and every day, actually. It's really nice to have you all here, and it's my pleasure to introduce Claire Kelly, our visiting artist for the week. Claire graduated with a BFA from Alfred University in 1996. She has completed residencies at prestigious institutions such as Corning Museum of Glass and Pittsburgh Glass Center. She received the Roseburg residency from Salem State University and was invited to demonstrate at the historic Glass Art Society conference, which just occurred in Murano, near Venice, last spring. This week, Claire has been working on using traditional Venetian cane and Marini techniques to create vessels with bold patterns, as I stand on it. Her work combines these accomplished techniques with a love of animals and a larger relationship to the world and environment. Her residency was selected from nearly 100 applications that the museum receives each year, and she is supported by Fueler Fire through the generous sponsorship of Laylee Weyerhaeuser and Kathy McGoldrick. So please join me in welcoming Claire Kelly.
Thank you, Katie. Hi, and thank you so much for joining us here today. I'm going to talk about my life and work for about 20 minutes, and then I'll open up the floor for questions. So log those questions away, and then we'll address them at the end. So, of course, it's a total honor and a pleasure to be here at the Tacoma Museum of Glass. I'm so thankful that they took my proposal and allowed me to have time here with the team. They've been working really hard for me, and it's a true treasure to have time with them, and I thank them very, very warmly. So I started at Alfred University. You can see this is a funny little piece I made. It's called Horses Fleeing a Burning Barn, and it's mixed media of glass animals and some metalwork and some neon bending. So I did a lot of fun media in college. And where that ended up taking me, Alfred is only about 45 minutes from the Corning Museum of Glass. And I started there as an intern in 1996, the first summer that the studio at the Corning Museum of Glass was opened. The studio is their school and rental facility. Now they also do a lot of other things there, but at the time it was a school. And the first instructors were Lino Tagliapietra, Paul Stankard, and one other, I'm forgetting, maybe Klaus Moye. It was a very, very high-end staffing. So there's me watching Lino, kind of just befuddled. Didn't really know what I was seeing at that time. I was probably 21, 22. During that time at Corning, I met my future partner, Anthony Schaefermeyer, and he was working with an artist in Vermont who did a lot of cane techniques. And so I kind of started to collaborate with Anthony, and we extrapolated on the cane techniques that he had learned from his boss and began putting together our own versions of these kind of complicated mosaic techniques. At one point, Anthony traveled to Europe, and I got to take over his job in Vermont, so I worked under the same artist and was able to significantly improve my skill set and really begin to explore glassblowing a little bit more invigoratingly. Sounds good. So these are some of the pieces that Anthony and I made together. We went under the business name Schaefermeyer Kelly Glass. And you can kind of see on this piece that we started to do, in addition to the cutting of the cane, to also do some carving on it. So if you look really closely at the profile of this piece, you can see some scalloping. And so that was a technique that was done cold, and then when it got hot again, that scalloping would kind of pull and open up a little bit, but it kept some texture, which was really fun and something to explore. I've lived in a lot of different places. One of the amazing benefits of this career is that I've gotten to travel a lot and also to live in many different spots in the country. So on the upper left is the house I lived in New Orleans. I was there for about 5 years. I moved away in 2004. And straight from New Orleans, I went to the Penland, North Carolina area. That's the shot of that little lake. That was my backyard in Penland, North Carolina. Just so beautiful and God's country, really gorgeous, Smoky Mountains of North Carolina. And then on the bottom center is a building that Anthony and I invested in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So really making my mark up and down the eastern seaboard. I don't know what that was. So Pittsburgh was where let's back up a little bit. So this is some more of the work I made with Anthony. These pieces all have a cane technique that's called Grawl on them. And so that means we made these long strips of glass with multi-layered colors and then used a sandblaster to cut through the colors and reveal patterns. And so this piece is called Bee's Knees. It was a kind of a beehive pattern with some little stylized bees kind of tucked in there in a couple different places. Color and form are really important to me when approaching this work. These are intricate pieces and a lot of work goes into them, but I'm really also interested in the form and the patterning helping to describe each other. There's a conversation between the color, the pattern, and the forms that's of particular interest to me, and I think this work really exemplified that, and I certainly carry it forward into the work I'm making now. These are a little bit more vessel-driven, but you can start to see a little bit of stripiness going on, complexity of form, of course. And that's what the work looks like before it's blown. So this is a very intensive process of making lots and lots of glass stripes, cutting them up into tiles or tessera, and then reassembling those onto a kiln shelf in order to be fused all back together. So this piece would look like that when it's blown. And if you look really carefully, you can see a little bit of pinstriping in the blue hexagons, and that's something that started to inform a lot of the work I do now. So in 2008, my partnership, both romantically and professionally, dissolved with Anthony, and we decided to split up and go our separate ways. Life happens. And 2008 was kind of a rocky year for the country and for us, and just artists in particular. Any disposable income was, nobody's buying glass. So I really needed to take time away from my making art career, and because of the personal journey I was on, I really didn't want to make glass. I was definitely at a creative nadir. I was not feeling creative. So I reached out to a good friend of mine who I knew from Europe, Tutsinski, and she's a glass artist. And I kind of said, hey, here's where I'm at. Providence seems like a nice town. What do you think? Would that be a good move for me? And she was not quite sure what was going on with jobs and stuff in Providence, but she did say that she had an opening at her studio because one of her assistants was going to go to grad school. And I said, that sounds great, let's talk. And so I had the really good fortune and luck to start working for Toots, whose work couldn't be technically more different from my training, my background, but I was able to take my skill sets and really learn her techniques and be a confident and able-bodied assistant to her almost right away, which she really appreciated. So I've been working with Toots since 2008. I still work for her today, although on a more part-time basis. This is a little brochure that we got at the studio in the mail, the 69th Conference on Glass Problems, and they used Toots's picture on the front. And we were like, that's funny, there's no problems with that glass, but it sounds like a conference I need to go to because I have glass problems. So like I said, I took a little bit of a hiatus away from the glassblowing studio, and I spent time working on myself and concentrating on what Toots had to teach me, which was a lot. After a little while, I did start to get some ideas for some work that I'd like to see executed in glass, and so I kind of put it together to rent some studio time and make these very funky little ideas that I could then put together cold in my own studio at home, not in the hot shop. The hot shop's quite expensive. I didn't have a large team of people. So I wanted to have something I could work on without having to have total access to a glassblowing studio. And I started to come up with these little fun drawings, and I really liked them. I also started to design some functional ware. This is a glass wine decanter. And when I got back into the studio, I was really rough and rocky. Some of the things that would come so easily to me earlier were a little tougher, and I had to put my brain back in order to be a glassblower again. And so I made these beautiful wine decanters, but they had a lot of bubbles in them because I made some mistakes, and bubbles happen. And I was kind of annoyed because I was like, well, these are really nice, and I don't think that they should be just junk because they have a few bubbles in them. But people have ideas. So I took a carving tool and I carved away where the bubbles were, and I put a little Swarovski crystal in each little divot that was left. And so in a way made the perceived flaw worth more. And it's the concept is borrowed loosely from the concept of kintsugi, which is, you can see on the right, is a technique of repairing broken pottery with precious metals. So that's a broken teacup that's been put back together with gold. And it makes the story of the break or the perceived flaw in the piece more valuable. And I really liked that as a concept. So I named these decanters, they're celestial terrestrial decanters, because the lines represent like a topographical map, and the little crystals represent the stars, and that's what you need for good wine. You need earth and time. This is the wallpaper that was in my room as a child. I grew up in the 70s and 80s, probably tell. And so I have this framed in my bedroom. It's just a really good reminder of the whimsy and innocence and love of my childhood and growing up. I had a very, very happy and successful childhood. And as a glass artist, I still had an affinity for technique, form, and pattern. And so some of these pieces, these are by other artists. On the top left is the work of Dick Marcus, very well-known Puget Sound glass artist from the early days of the glass studio movement. And he's known for his highly technical and multicolored Marini patterns. And so I really liked Dick's elephants, and I liked the way that they mimicked, in the historical fashion, the elephants that are down on the bottom right, which are made by Napoleone Martinuzzi for the Venini Company in Italy. And so you can see a real relationship between the way that they look, this very gestural kind of study. Everything is done a little fast and a little quick. It's not tinkered over. I really liked the way that those elephants just had this glassy and yet perfectly characteristic elephantness about them. And so I was very much looking at these for inspiration. And these were some of the early drawings I started to do for those. I'm not an amazing draftsman, but I really enjoy drawing and painting. And it helps me to get out of my head a little bit and just let my hands do something. And I often use my drawings to refer back to for ideas, because a lot of good ideas come out when you're just sort of half thinking about things. You're kind of in the zone. So these were a lot of little drawings that I did. And this was the first elephant I made when I was finally reintroducing myself to the glassblowing practice. I did the base with that topography-ish pattern, and then this little like funny elephant on top. I mean, I struggled to make that. I didn't know what I was doing. And I didn't even put a little tail on him. I didn't even think of it. But anyway, I think he's adorable, and I love it that it looks like a childhood drawing. I'll never be able to make them like that again, because it's so naive, and I just wouldn't be able to make the same mistakes again. It's kind of nice, in a way. I think he's really sweet. And of course, there is an element of environmental influence in what I do. A lot of the work that I make is a form of art therapy for me that helps me to balance out my conflicted views of the human influence on our planet and our direct interference and cause of the potential extinction of species. And so that kind of thinking leads very quickly to a downward spiral. It's not easy to think about, and it's very hard on your psyche. And so I started a lot of this work is being made to help me balance out these things in my life and try to keep up hope and the potential for things to get better. This is a little bit of process shots. What you see here are the initial canes that I would make. Cane is just an arbitrary term that we use to describe these pieces of glass, but what they are sticks of solid glass that have color on the outside, so they look like they're a solid color, but if you look at it down the edge, you would see that there's clear on the inside. So they look like very saturated, big color, but there is actually clear under there forming the bulk of the glass. So I make all of these in the studio and just spend a few days pulling cane, just making what I need or think I'm gonna need. You always need more than you think. And when they're cold, I can start to cut them up and think about what they're going to be next. So this would be an example of one of those cane pieces cut up, reassembled onto a plate into that pattern. And then there's me on the right with that pattern on a blowpipe. You can see it's kind of a cylinder. The end is a little bit open. That'll get cut down. And when that's cut down, now you have a bubble, and you can start to make a form out of that. And that would be the finished piece. So in 2015, I submitted this piece to an auction at the Pittsburgh Glass Center. I lived in Pittsburgh for a while, as I mentioned before, and the Pittsburgh Glass Center had always been wonderful to me. And they happened to have this nice little option where if you won, you could win a residency as part of the donation of your piece to their auction. And so I took a chance, I made this piece, and submitted it to them, and it won second place in the Juror's Choice Award, which was I don't remember, it was a certain amount of money towards working at the Pittsburgh Glass Center that I could just use to make my own work. So that was a great opportunity to explore some new ideas, and I knew Pittsburgh really well, so it was very easy to go there, and I just ended up staying for, I think, three weeks. They gave me a place to stay for free. So just whatever I had to pay my assistants. So that was the out-of-pocket expense. So it was very, very creative and bountiful time. And this is me working on one of the pieces out of the kiln, just polishing a punny off the bottom. And these are some of the works that came out of that residency. I started to do kind of these big loopy designs that mimic kind of a rainbow, and just really playing with color and trying to do a lot of interesting things with complementary colors. A lot of elephants. I was getting better at them. So I like making them. They're really fun to make. And you can see I've kind of put my own spin on the cane elements that went into the, sort of like a mix of Dick Marcus's and the Italian elephants. It's my own little take on those. 2016, I was invited to teach a 2-month workshop at Penland School of Crafts in North Carolina. So that was nice. I lived in North Carolina before, so I got to go and revisit that area. And this is some of the work I tried while I was working there. So kind of still that loopy cane technique, little bit of layering going on. Not everything has to have an animal on it. And in the course of working on some of these techniques, I ran into some issues with my color. Glass color is a fussy animal, and I have a feeling I'm going to spend the rest of my life figuring it out, but it's chemistry and it's physics. So there's only so much you can do to make it better. So I was making this work, and because my process involves multiple heats and cools, the color evolves. That's the term that we use, and it actually changes as you heat it and cool it and heat it and cool it. And the crystals inside the color that create this gorgeous glowing, oranges and reds and yellows, and in this case, some really gorgeous kind of salmon colors. The crystals start to grow, and the color actually becomes incompatible. Incompatible is just the word we use to mean that it will break the glass around it as it cools. So I was getting very frustrated with that, and it was heartbreaking, and I lost a lot of really beautiful pieces because I made the wrong choices in color. So that, got me thinking, and I tried to think about outside the box, and I had this fabulous history. I worked for Tutsinski, and she uses this Italian glass. I use it every day in the studio. I'm very aware of it and where it comes from and what it's all about. And I was like, I want to use that Italian glass. I want to blow glass with that. And so Toots's work is all kiln formed. She's not using a hot glass furnace to make her work. But I would look at this glass every day, and I was like, I want to do that in the glass blowing studio. So I proposed a residency to the Corning Museum of Glass in 2017 to melt this Italian glass in their furnaces and make my designs and my work from that. So on the left there, that is the form that the colored glass comes in. It comes in long sticks, a lot like the cane that we use, like a lot like these little pieces on the table over here. That's the form that it comes in. So I had to adapt my techniques to that format, but other than that, the glass was lovely to work with. I also had to buy the clear glass to go with that color glass, because you can't just blow glass with just straight color. I mean, you can, but it's difficult. So we also had to have a furnace, like these furnaces, full of special clear glass that didn't fit with the other glasses that were being used in the studio, so it was just mine. And Corning was the perfect place to do that because they have a lot of facilities and they were able to carve out a spot for me and dedicate a furnace to me. So that was the process. I had a month at Corning, and that was the process of figuring out how to create my designs in these formats. It was an incredible time. I love working with this glass. They did melt a little bit of color for me, and I was able to make some things, cane that we call Marini. It's you make a design, and when you turn it on its edge, you see the design inside. It's like candy making. So you can kind of just see those little color pots. We just melted a little bit of color, and then I gathered it out and made some things. So this is my little hard-boiled egg Marini. And these are some of the pieces I made from that residency. Towards the end of the residency, I decided to focus on just one aspect of the glass that I was using, and that was to make kind of this repeating spectra of color and just picking them up on a clear bubble and letting the stripes stay straight, and to just let that color kind of do its own thing, because it was so saturated and beautiful. I didn't really feel like I needed to mess with it that much. I just wanted these pieces to kind of be their own description of themselves. And so these are the final results of that residency. And this was an installation I did at a gallery in New York. It's called Geospectra. And I made some other animals to populate this little weird landscape. And so I have a couple new additions to the family. We've got a couple of foxes and this funny little giraffe-like creature. It had like this spiky mane. It was very, very fun. I like the idea of doing fantasy creatures in the future, but I haven't gotten there yet. These are some more pieces that were started at the Corning residency and finished later on. I made some new animals. And so we have a couple of different giraffes there and a seal. And there's a nice little sea lion piece here. Oh, right. Both those pieces are on the pedestals right here. So every once in a while I have an opportunity to get back into some multicolored pattern work. This was in a commission that I accepted after having a piece with a similar pattern here at the Museum of Glass for their auction last year. And then I applied for yet another residency to Salem Artworks in Salem, New York, which is a wonderful studio and sculpture park. And they have a small glassblowing facility there, and they were able to take on my project to work with the Italian glass again. The business name of the place that I'm buying my glass from is Effitre. So that happened just this past September. And these are going to be the results of some of that work, along with some of the drawings that I do and paintings. You can see I'm not taking things incredibly seriously. I have a lot of Marini to use up from my Corning residency, so I was actually able to take some of that Marini from Corning that I wasn't able to get to and bring it right over to Salem with me and start working with that. And that resulted in some of these pieces. So you can kind of see I've included some of my drawings and designs. Just these are the inspirations. Obviously, they're not dead copies of what I've drawn, but the idea is there, the influence is there. And while I'm working on this work, again, I'm just really looking at how the form and the colors and the patterns all describe each other, how they work together, and what the final result sort of tells a story about. They're little microcosms, they're little worlds, and they exist in their own little universe. There's those foxes again, but this time done in close to appropriate fox colors, kind of climbing over a little form, and you can see the drawing on the left there, kind of where those come from. Like I said, I'm not a great drawer, but I love doing it. I think it comes through. And these were some drawings I did of this like fantasy landscape idea that I was sort of playing with back from that work from Corning, that Geospectra piece. And that was the final result of that exploration, and this is something I'm looking forward to doing more of. And there's a little bird's nest in one of the trees. There's a little hollow in the tree, and there's a little bird's nest in there. And that was the first time I've lamp worked and included any lamp working into a sculpture, and that's also something that I'm going to start working more with. I don't have any formal training in it, but I look forward to changing that soon. Little Noah's Ark themed pieces, these little, I call them lifeboats. This is a new series, and these are the only two I've had a chance to make so far, but this is something I'm really looking forward to creating more of. It'll also give me an excuse and an opportunity to create more animal forms. And I just want to say thank you for having me. This has been an incredible treat and honor. So thirsty. Anybody have any questions? Questions? I don't. The question was, do I have any more residencies coming up? No, I think I've exploited all the all the generosity that I can for a while. No, I'll go home and like I said, I have a little part-time job. I'm doing a show in December in Boston. I have a show up at Duncan McClellan's Gallery in St. Petersburg, Florida right now. And yeah, things are busy. It's good. It's good to be busy, and I'm just thrilled that I'm able to do this. I'm so lucky. Anybody else? Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, the making it's actually pretty fun. What I like to do is, see if I can just show you anything here. So, here's a piece of, this is short, but you get the idea. This is a piece of glass. It's got orange and yellow stripes on the top, but underneath it's just clear glass. So what I'll do is I'll gather clear glass out of the furnace and have my assistant heat up a little plate with the orange and yellow stripes on it, and those would look like this. And those would be set next to each other on the little plate, warmed up enough so that they get warm and they stick together a little bit, and then I roll the clear glass over them, and so they stick to the surface. Now I have a ball of clear glass with orange and yellow stripes on one side. I'll get that hot, form it up a little bit, stop turning on the marver so it squares up. As soon as I stop turning, the weight will take it and make it flat on one side. And then I do the other side, and then the short sides. I'll do that a couple of times till it's just right. And this is the fun part, which I cannot show you here at the museum. They don't have the technology. But I actually pull these vertically. So the glass is on a blowpipe, and the blowpipe has a lock washer up towards the end. I hook that lock washer into a hook, and then my assistant has a rope. The rope goes to the ceiling through a little pulley and attaches to the hook where my blowpipe is. They lift up, and I'm able to stretch that glass vertically up and down and keep it nice and straight. Yeah, it's like an extruding process. You know, if you've ever heard of how they used to make thermometers, they would drop the glass down to make it long and skinny. And so that's how I make those. Particularly for the glass that has square sides, it's really easy to twist that by accident, and so we want to keep it nice and straight. And so that allows me a lot of leeway to control the glass and control the speed at which it's moving. So it is fun to watch, just we don't have that here. They tend to be, I think, between 15 and 20 feet, if I have the ceiling height for it. Oh, so when the cane pull is on the pipe, it's, like I said, 15-ish feet long. Then it gets chilly. It's not molten anymore. It's got a nice chill to it, and I can actually touch it with a tool and break it right there. And then, so I'll break it down into long sections, about 1 meter long, and then I put it into an annealer to cool overnight. And then I've got my base materials. Now I've got a lot of stockpiling. Yeah. I'm going to need to hear that question again. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. You could probably answer this better than I can. Seattle Art Institute and the University of Washington in Seattle? Okay. So yeah, the University of Washington does have a glass program. Oh, and the UW-Tacoma has glass classes that are taught here at the Museum of Glass. Very fancy. Yeah. The elephants, well, everything I do has a lot of process in it. So in the case of the elephants, I do a lot of prep work. And one of the things I do to try to save time and resources is I make parts. So I'll do a whole day of glass blowing where I just make colored tubes with stripes on them. They tend to be about that long and about that thick. And I'll just do those for a whole day. And then when they're put away into the annealer, they sit overnight. When they come out, I can slice them up into smaller parts, and then each one of these can become an animal. So I could cut them bigger if I wanted to make something bigger. I could cut them smaller if they're going to be smaller. But yeah, that I make a lot of parts. So this is time consuming. I have to make all the little bits that go into it, all the color costs money, etc. And I have to have an assistant, all that. Once I actually pick this up and make something out of it, the elephants take about an hour. Other animals take longer. The giraffes take the longest. The foxes are not quite as long, but they're still quite time consuming. So yeah, there's a lot that goes on. Like this is a fox tube. So it's got the little white belly and the little orange top. So after we finish up here, we're going to put this pattern into a kiln to warm up. And so this is a pattern I've prepared. I made all the glass canes before I came to the Museum of Glass and brought these pre-prepared. And so this is going to go into a kiln. It'll warm up to about 1,000 degrees, and then we'll pick that up and fuse it, get it onto a glass blowing pipe, and make a form out of it. So that's the plan for after lunch. I don't know what time it is even. It's after 2. I might have to have a snack. Anybody else? I did. Yeah, back in college, I actually did a lot of neon bending. I thought maybe it would be like something I could get a job in out of school. I didn't end up really pursuing it, but it really is a lot of fun. Yeah, neon's a good time. It's hard, but it's good. I really appreciate you guys being here. This was so nice. Thank you. And thank you to the museum. You guys have been amazing hosts. I'm going to turn this off now.